Good afternoon. I'll call to order the August 3rd, 2023 meeting of the Santa Barbara Local Agency Formation Commission. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Commissioner Allen,
Here.
Commissioner Freeman, Commissioner Geyer,
Here.
Commissioner Hartman,
Here.
Commissioner Nelson,
Here.
Commissioner Osborne, Commissioner Patino,
Here.
Commissioner Richardson,
Here.
Commissioner Stark,
Here.
Commissioner Williams, Commissioner Kiriakou.
Here.
Let the record reflect that Commissioner Osborne, Commissioner Williams, and Commissioner Freeman are absent.
Please stand and join me for the pledge. Ready? Begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Next order of business is approval of our minutes of May 4th, 2023. Is there any discussion of the minutes? And if not, may I have a motion to approve?
Second.
And Patino moved and Director Nelson seconded. Roll call vote, please.
Commissioner Allen,
Aye.
Commissioner Geyer,
Aye.
Commissioner Kiriakou,
Aye.
Commissioner Patino,
Aye.
Commissioner Stark,
Aye.
Commissioner Nelson,
Aye.
Chair Hartman.
Aye.
Motion passes
Willi-
unanimously.
Williams, aye.
Oh, thank you, Commissioner Williams.
All right. Now is the time for public comment on matters not on today's agenda. Do we have any speaker slips, Madam Clerk?
Chair Hartman and members of the commission, I do not have any speaker slips. However, I would like to remind members of the public who are wishing to be called on for public comment to please use the raise hand button on Zoom or press *9 on your touch-tone phone when the item you wish to speak on has begun. And we have no request to speak under public comment.
All right, thank you. Then moving to the consent calendar, are there any items that any directors would like, any commissioners would like to pull today? Anybody on Zoom participating remotely?
Chair Hartman and members of the commission, we have no requests.
All right, may I have a motion to approve the consent calendar? So moved. And a second? Madam Clerk.
Commissioner Allen,
Aye.
Commissioner Geyer, Commissioner Kiriakou,
Aye.
Commissioner Patino,
Aye.
Commissioner Stark,
Aye.
Commissioner Williams,
Aye.
Chair Hartman.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously.
The next item is business item number 1. Madam Clerk, would you read that into the record?
Chair Hartman and members of the commission, business item number 1 is to consider creation of an appointment of commission members to an ad hoc committee to review and make recommendations regarding future commission policies covering agricultural urban interface concerns.
Mr. Prater.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair and Commissioners. So this is an item for the Commission to discuss the urban ag conflict that we've been speaking about. The anticipation is we would form a 3-member committee of the Commission. Executive officer would operate as staff to that. We anticipate conducting 5 to 6 meetings to hear from the various working groups and stakeholders about the issues that they foresee from their perspective for the commissioners, and then allow the commission ad hoc committee to decide if there's enough there that would warrant some sort of a policy change and report back to the full commission at your pleasure at the end of that. So if there are any questions about the ad hoc committee and its establishment, welcome to answer any further questions.
Let me first say, let the record reflect that both Commissioner Freeman and Williams have joined us. And do we have any questions about the formation of the ad hoc committee? Commissioner Kiriakou.
Thank you. Are there any exclusions or Brown Act considerations that
need to be thought about in terms of potential service of alternate members of this commission?
I think this is going to be a standing committee as we see it with a limited focus. So I believe we can have alternates on this committee.
So in other words, we could have people appointed, and then each of them could have an alternate if they can't make the 4 or 5 meetings?
No, sorry. If an alternate
Sir.
member wanted to serve on the committee at the pleasure of the commission, they could allow that alternate to submit. But we would not have a secondary stand-in.
Madam Chair, just a point of order. We are noticed for the creation of an ad hoc committee. I don't know if it's
Not a standing committee?
I don't know if it's a dramatic change to make it a standing committee. It makes it subject to the Brown Act,
Right.
of course, is the biggest difference. But anyway, that's all I have.
Mr. Geyer and then Mr. Stark.
Well, I guess a question for council. Normally, ad hoc committees are not standing committees.
That's right. It cannot be a standing committee. Ad hoc committee by definition is ad hoc and not standing.
And we're noticed for ad hoc. Mr. Stark.
Yeah, I have a comment and a couple of questions, I suppose. The overarching question is whether we really need an ad hoc committee at all. Period. The last time we did it, went through a number of meetings and concluded that no policy change was necessary because Knox Cortese already gave us a lot of discretion. So we could, if we not, invoke the principle that the more discretion we retain and the less we limit, the better, and not decide to adopt any new regulations if we wanted to, or convene the ad hoc committee and have the ad hoc committee make that same determination and report back to the commission if we wanted. Is that correct?
That is correct.
As a secondary matter, not to jump ahead on the agenda, but it occurs that business item 3 contains a recommendation that a set of handbook policies be amended to deal for one specific matter. And we got not only a request to continue it from the ag community, but several comments from different cities that perhaps the particular policy ought to be bigger or broader or different in some respect. There are various alternatives. So we might consider folding that question into the ad hoc committee and have them report back rather or as part of the next business item. You following me?
I am. Let's see. My first comment is that you were the one, I think, who initially suggested the ad hoc committee. It arose in the context of Bailey Avenue, and on what criteria do we decide to expand a sphere of influence boundary and eventually anticipate annexation into prime agricultural land. We did have an earlier ad hoc committee that was looking at our agricultural policies, and that was with Etta, Roger, and myself, and we came back. But maybe Mr. Prater, could you talk about how you envision this committee being different and the focus and the charge than the committee we already had, and that might give us a better sense of whether this deals with business item number 3 or not.
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair. So the vision I took away from the heels of that discussion with Bailey Avenue when the matter was asked to be put on a future agenda item was essentially to look specifically at an ag-urban conflict, as that was one of the issues that came out of that kind of discussion with school sites being close by, residential neighborhoods, what might be a proper buffer between development that might be occurring on the ag fringe, and not necessarily looking at our ag policies per se. I felt like those were looked at and deemed prudent for the commission to give them broad discretion in that decision, and you wanted to keep those in place. And so in order to better understand what urban ag interface looks like, because it could look and feel different to everybody. Cities certainly have a certain perspective, county would have a different perspective, that we would dive into that specific issue to see whether or not it warranted the commission to develop a policy or not, because we currently do not have a policy. The policy as it stands is really allowing the land use authority to make that decision about what is part and parcel to their particular application. So they may come forward with an application that suggests a 30-foot buffer or a 200-foot buffer, whatever it is that land use authority and the applicant is proposing. The commission would have the discretion to look at that and decide. But if you specifically wanted to look at a narrowing policy of a minimum, then you would utilize this sort of committee to develop such a policy.
Do you know, have other, you're much involved with LAFCO, have other LAFCOs developed policies on buffers and ag-urban interface?
Not to my knowledge. It's not common for other LAFCOs throughout the state to have a specific ag buffer policy.
Well, let me just say and see if anybody agrees with me, but I think if we're defining it as a targeted buffer ag urban interface, then this is separate from business item number 3, and we can proceed to discuss this. Would you agree, Mr. Stark?
Absolutely. Allow me to clarify. I will own that I was a person that initially had a lot of questions about whether there were best practices and policies for the ag-urban interface. I have since checked with my expert sources, to wit the League of Women Voters Housing Warriors, or the Doogie Housers as we refer to them, and the rural counties, I don't know what the other RC, I think it's Ride 'em Cowboy, RC. An old colleague of mine named Art Wileen, who sends his regards to Commissioner Nelson. We had a very lengthy conversation about whether there are best practices, whether it's likely that further legislative inroads are going to be made into Knox-Cortese and similar related issues. How does climate change requirements relate to what we're doing, and how do you preserve some modicum of local control? All of which I think would be germane issues for an ad hoc subcommittee. I'm not questioning the validity of doing that. I think the experience of gathering the facts is probably a good idea. I guess what I'm questioning is whether ultimately we would come to the conclusion that it's actually necessary to have specific policies in any regard.
So if I might just follow up for a question, do you favor moving forward with an ad hoc with this directive to explore buffers and how to mediate some of the conflict with urban ag development?
I think it's probably a worthwhile learning experience. I would make a suggestion that is one of the guidelines for the ad hoc committee, that when they have workshops, that they actually be open to the public. I understand that one of the advantages of an ad hoc is you can meet by Zoom and you're not subject to the Brown Act rigors. But if you had a workshop where the idea is to get input from the public, it might be a good idea to have that sort of meeting open to the public and receive as much public comment as you can.
Mr. Geyer.
I think that's the problem. Ad hoc committees aren't open to the public, and
It can be.
that's why I don't support forming an ad hoc committee. Okay. Yeah, ad hoc committees aren't open to the public. If we had a committee that was open to the public, I could see a benefit where vetting some of this with the public, getting a sense of what the public feels before it comes to the commission for deliberation, then I would support that. But ad hoc committees aren't open to the public, and
I'd ask council, my impression is that ad hoc committees could be open to the public if the committee chooses to make them so. They're just not required to have their meetings.
I think
meetings open to
the
public.
difference is that an ad hoc committee isn't subject to the Brown Act.
That's correct, but they can make their meetings.
I've never seen that,
subject
so
to-
I'll leave it up to council.
More than one thing. can
Mr.
be true at
Dillon,
the
would you
same
like
time.
to weigh in on that? And then Mr. Nelson would like to go after you.
He's coming after me.
It's true.
Madam Chair, I think the meetings could be made public, and certainly the commission could create it on the understanding or requirement, your requirement that they be public. But being the lawyer in the room, it would not be subject to any of the penalties or other provisions of the Brown Act for violations of, the requirements of the Brown Act for posting and all the other things that go with it. So
So we could form an ad hoc and make it more available to the public than required by an ad hoc committee normally. And we have the discretion to do that if we so direct.
I see nothing prohibiting that from happening. I think you can do that.
Commissioner Nelson?
Yes, thank you, Chair Hartman. It was probably Commissioner Stark's idea, but I think I was in the chorus to have this ad hoc committee. I think it's really important. We have broad discretion, but the problem with broad discretion is that everything can be allowed and everything can be prohibited. And I think giving a framework for municipalities to potentially expand in the future is good. What's the best practices? What would we want to see come to us so that we potentially could approve an annexation in sphere of influence? If we set out those guidelines, I think it could help applicants and could help municipalities understand how to deal with LAFCO. What are we looking for? Is it a blanket ban on any expansion in agriculture? Are we essentially making that policy at some point by opposing everything that does expand? Sprawl doesn't have a definition, as far as I understand. Maybe we could start to define what we at least think sprawl looks like. Is that a massive invasion into agriculture? Is it an incremental look? Is 1 acre sprawl, or is it 100 acres sprawl? And I think those are some things that would be helpful for those that are looking at potential growth in their communities. I know City of Santa Maria is going through a general plan process right now that is looking at annexations into potential agricultural lands. So is that something that we want to send that, hey, that's not on the table? City of Santa Maria going through that process, maybe you should pull back now because you're never going to get through us. I think we should have an honest process and let the city know way in advance that that's where this LAFCO's at, so they don't go through that exercise, spend all that money. If it's something that we're open to, here are the check boxes that you would need to accomplish for that to happen. And so I think having that better defined, I think also Commissioner Williams had set forth that he, with the LAMPO conversation was, he could support this if there were things that were already being done on the infill sites within the community, and if he felt satisfied. What are those things that we were looking for? So I think that's the information that I like to see come out of that ad hoc committee, is a kind of a better communication with those that come before us. I don't think we should be a complete black box. I think we should be a group that we can, express our values and the groups that we represent, and hopefully that makes this a more healthy and constructive process moving forward. So I'm in favor of an ad hoc. As names start to go around, it's something I'm very interested in being involved in. I have I represent a lot of agricultural areas, a lot of the areas that will likely be subject to potential annexations in the future, at least in North County. So I think I've got a very vested interest, as well as my background in agriculture. I think there's a balance there where I'm trying to protect both interests, and it's something I try to do as a supervisor, and something I'll be doing here as a commissioner throughout my service. And so I think I could bring some value there, and I do absolutely support it being public. I think we need to bring a lot of the stakeholders to the table, those that often oppose these projects, that look like sprawl. So let's hear what are your concerns, and are there ways to mitigate those things, and talk through those things, and move things forward to our commission in the future. So those are my goals.
Mr. Freeman.
somewhat in support of, but also kind of an expansion of Commissioner Nelson's comments. There was earlier discussion about the later agenda item, which is coming up with, which is the looking at a specific area. And while it is not in this, in the description of the high-level description that has so far been provided for this committee, which is ag-urban interface boundaries, it is this process of looking at what are the process by which, like, what are the minutia by which we end up judging specific proposals for annexation or sphere of influence expansions for cities into agricultural areas. And so I could see kind of expanding the scope of this discussion in order to figure out what is the process by which we make those kinds of decisions for both of these problems that have come up that are kind of like coming to us. And that also makes me feel a little bit more comfortable, I almost want to say, for the committee already, because it already was kind of coming up because there was one specific thing that people wanted us to like argue about. But by expanding the scope of it to looking at that area and also expanding the scope of it to look at the other area that we're looking at, it starts to feel more like a general problem to me that we're trying to figure out. But. Oh, and sorry, I wanted to add that I'm very supportive of the idea that it should be, if we're going to do this, as opposed to being with the full commission, because I think this is actually kind of core to our work. If we're going to do it in the committee, I think it really should be, as previously described, focusing on workshops with the public in a way of being able to bring on lots more feedback that would be potentially like make sense within the scope of the full commission meetings. That said, I am not certain that I see a need for it to be a Brown Act committee, for the reason that if you want to do these like extremely deep workshops where you end up bringing in lots of feedback, having it in the Brown Acted version of that can actually end up, you start to being like, okay, well, we should maybe limit public comment in certain ways that are the way that we normally end up structuring public comment, whereas if you want to have the really deep interaction and feedback, maybe you don't want to do that. But I'm not supportive of the Brown Act. I was just saying that I was like kind of leaning towards the ad hoc version of this rather than the standing version, or not standing, rather than the full committee version of this.
And just let me press a little bit. I think you were saying that you might favor the whole commission participating, or?
Yeah, if I could see an argument that this is essentially like really core to our work. This is something where we're essentially making these decisions about how the commission will be taking these very serious actions that end up addressing some of the most controversial issues that come before our commission. And so the idea of kind of like relegating that to a committee makes me feel a little squeezy about it, unless it's really about trying to bring on lots of feedback with workshops and something, a set of like specifically ad hoc committees that had a lot of feedback from the public that I end up thinking about, not from LAFCO, but from the Board of Supervisors working with the Chumash expansions and various issues there. That was a very deep, very involved with the public set of commissions or committee actions. So.
Commissioner Patino, did you want to weigh in?
Thank you. I have no objection to an ad hoc committee. In fact, I think it'd be a great idea. I think it'd be informational for us and educational in making decisions. I don't know how many people in here have any connection at all to the ag community and have maybe many misconceptions. With cities, well, any jurisdiction having to meet the RENA numbers, one size does not fit all. And I know in Santa Maria we are building and building and building away, and yet the state comes in and does certain things to us and impedes what we want to do in Santa Maria. We want to build. We know we have to build. We have several families living in homes, but at the same time we have to figure out how do we want to grow and balance, because we do have prime ag land. That's the engine that drives Santa Maria and North County. And so I think that's really important, but I really would like to see real ag people at the table on the committee, people that can tell you what the restrictions are, what the mandates are, understand the water, and can answer these questions as we go along. And as I said, this will be informational for all of us and educational. I would hope that whatever comes out of it, like Mr. Stark said, we may find out we don't want to change anything, but I think we're going to gain a lot for it. And whether or not the scope of how we want to go is very narrow or the scope is broad. And like I said, in North County is very different than South County. and so I think we have to respect both sides of this. But I do think that we need real ag people on that committee, and I guess any of us, and I would love to serve on the committee, but any of us that would like to serve on the committee also. So I don't know how, I have
Sure.
no really opinions how to form it, but basically.
Okay, well, I'm getting the sense that we do want to move forward. Exactly how, we're not sure. Is there anyone who's participating remotely who would like to weigh in, who I can't see?
This is Doss. I think sometimes the committee is good to examine things aspects of a problem. I would just counsel, this about the scope. I would hope that a committee would articulate more what the nature of the problem is, rather than try to prescribe the solution to the entire LAFCO board, because I think all of us already have pretty strong feelings about this. So, to have a productive dialogue from having a committee at all seems like you'd really need to do that.
And what are you thinking in terms of ad hoc or the whole LAFCO board participating?
Well, I think that rather than have the entire board participating in the discussion, I don't know. I think it depends on. I guess I'm cynical enough to think that a committee at this point, because this isn't like just a specialized issue. It's kind of a core issue to the LAFCO board, that maybe having a committee isn't a good idea, and we should just have the willingness to have an hour session or 2-hour session on the nature of the issue, and do it as a whole board.
Okay, Mr. Geyer.
Well, again, my concern with an ad hoc committee is the purpose of an ad hoc committee is pretty narrow. It's for a specific subject, has a specific period of time that they do, and then they render a recommendation. And this whole thing sounds like it's getting very broad, and so I don't think I could support an ad hoc committee.
Okay, Mr. Kiriakou.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I think that the important thing for me is that regardless of, at the end of the day, the committee members are themselves experts on agriculture or not, that their constituents and those that they represent straddle both and have the understanding of both. The other core principle for me, if we're going to have an ad hoc committee, would be that the discussions be heavily influenced by subject matter experts that are in agriculture, and that cities also have a seat at that table. So if you're getting the input from both more of the urban side and the ag side, and then you've got members of the committee that represent both or are uniquely sensitive to both, then I can support that. For example, I represent simultaneously a low-income community that's bordered by several hundred acres of prime agriculture. Like, that's Old Town Goleta, South Patterson Ag Block. They're right there. And then factor in multi-jurisdictional, right? So, so there's sensitivities there. I think that there are good cases for people in the central part of the county and the northern part of the county. There are certain communities where the urban-rural interface is critical to their short-term, medium-term, and long-term futures. And I think that as long as there's that representation with that empathy and that perspective, and the people that are going to come and not just participate, but provide testimony and provide data, and we're consuming, analyzing, and drawing assumptions and conclusions from that data, not necessarily with the intention of saying we've diagnosed the problem and here's the solution, but here are some of the 3 to 5 core principles we think that LAFCO, in its capacity as the governing board and the jurisdictional entity, can then strongly consider. So that's where I'm coming from. And if I hadn't already made it clear, I'm also interested in throwing my hat in the ring, which is why I asked about alternates.
Mr. Nelson.
Yes, something that I see this is bringing back facts to us, and then we deliberate about that. I'm not necessarily looking. My perception of this is coming back with a bunch of recommended actions. I think it's an opportunity to hear from agriculture, hear from grower shippers, hear from some of the advocates out there that have often maybe opposed some of these projects. I'd love to hear from SB what kind of growth would you be okay with, and what are your concerns in that conversation, so that we can digest that. I could go do that as an individual commissioner, go reach out to all those groups, but it seemed would be more efficient if we all got the same story at the same time from all these different stakeholders. And so that's what my goal out of an ad hoc committee would look like. And so that's what I'm hoping comes from it. And if it's doing it from the whole board, that's fine. We could have a workshop, but I think it may be more efficient to be able to have that more conversation in a ad hoc format. But again, support public as well.
I think I've been taking some notes on what I think the charge would be of a group that would consider this. So what would be required for LAFCO to approve SOI expansions or annexations, or what factors would we consider? And so we would define the problem, maybe infill sites, irregular boundaries, buffers, the impact of RENA. There might be other things, but those are some of the issues that people have mentioned. So I think there's a general consensus that we don't have an answer to that, and we'd like to explore the question further. In terms of the process, what I've heard is people would want the public to be involved, and we want a workshop format where it's not just 3 minutes and there's more opportunity to interact. What I also hear is that many of us would like to serve, and we can only have 3 given Brown Act, and so there might be an advantage in trying to graft this onto, maybe it's a day-long workshop, maybe it's grafted onto LAFCO meetings. We bring in various people to come talk to us. I would say that real ag people, we have very diverse ag in our county, and we do have an ag advisory commission that is representative of the different ag sectors, and they would be one of the groups, obviously, that we would rely on. The Board of Supervisors and Planning Commission rely upon them, but I think it's hard to say who's real ag. At least I have that difficulty in my district. Horses are real ag. Yeah. Yeah.
I think that when you form an ad hoc committee, one of the principles of it is that you give a clear definition what the purpose of that ad hoc committee is. And maybe we could continue this to the next meeting, I guess in September, and come back with what a clear definition of that would be.
Yeah, I've tried to capture some of it, but we could certainly work on that some more if we feel that there's a need. Okay, where are we? We do want to do something. We want to give a clear charge, and public and workshop setting. Do we need an ad hoc, or would we all like to participate together as a board? And I need a read on that.
Do we have any public comment?
I was just going to also add before you get to public comment. Right now, we're really noticed for a very specific ad hoc committee to look at the urban-rural interface conflicts.
Yes.
So if you want to expand it, I think I would suggest you give direction to Mr. Prater to bring the item back in September. Won't quite be a continuance because you're going to expand the scope of the notice if you want to, or have it expanded.
So to look at something like infill sites would not be looking at the urban-rural conflict.
Right. Thank you.
Kick the can down the road?
Madam Chair, if I may add, I think you're on to a point, a salient point in that does this commission feel like you want it broader and more interest? then maybe a more workshop format would be more advantageous. And we would forego an ad hoc committee and just target some sort of a workshop element to this, in which we would take all of these concepts, put them on the table, and allow the commission to kind of hear it universally.
So let me just ask for board members to weigh in on that, and then we'll go to public comment.
Yeah. I think kicking the can down the road in some of the spirit of Women's World Cup, Willie. Pass the cup, kick the down the road to the next meeting to consider various alternatives, including but not limited to an ad hoc committee, bearing in mind all the different viewpoints we serve, is probably a good idea. Take time to refine the idea, and if there's no public, well,
Mr. Geyer?
yeah.
I favor the workshop idea because then you can get the full commission involved with it, open to the public, Brown Act meeting.
Okay, I'm with Mr. Geyer, although I'm not sure about the Brown Act, because it would be nice to let people participate easily remotely if they have to, but.
Yeah, my understanding is if you have a majority of commissioners present and
In one
time and
place,
place,
then
it's
it's
a
okay.
Brown Act meeting.
Yeah.
That's right.
Mr. Kiriakou?
I can support the meeting. I mean, I actually thought the scope that staff laid out made sense, and I think we got so focused on the intended outcomes that we broadened out sort of by default. And I'm not sure that was entirely necessary. That being said, I can support a workshop, and perhaps we just end up at the end of the day after the workshop deciding we still need the ad hoc with the prior scope, or maybe we broaden it, in which case I'd probably be more sensitive to Commissioner Geyer's complaints.
Cynthia?
Madam Chair,
Yes?
I agree to the workshop scenario. It seems to me that it'd give a better opportunity for the whole board to understand the issue at hand. The ad hoc committee, if it's limited to a year, I don't know that we can get the work done in a year, but it could be renewed, I imagine. But the idea of a workshop with the ag people and others to provide input to us would be very, very beneficial to all of us.
Thank you, Commissioner Richardson.
I like the workshop idea. Give the public chance to present their information without the added stress of a specific project they're trying to fight.
Okay. Commissioner Patino?
Thank you. I like the workshop idea, but I would like to see us really go into an ad hoc committee. I think it's important. I think it's valuable. So.
Commissioner Freeman?
I am very supportive of this workshop idea, partly because I do think this is going to end up being something that's going to be very core to the work of the commission. But
Commissioner Nelson?
Yeah, it's, chicken and the egg, really. I mean, because at some point we're going to take all this workshop and work on it. And so I'm okay with it being the full board. I think that might solve some of the problems of all of us that want to be on it. I think a lot of us want to jump in onto this. And so that's a way that we can assure that all the commissioners, because we all represent, organizations constituents. And we want that opportunity to make sure that we represent those views and those perspectives in this conversation. So that probably is the right decision to
Okay.
make.
Madam Clerk, public comment.
Chair Hartman and members of the commission, we do have requests to speak on this item. First, I would just like to remind any members who are joining us on Zoom, if you would like to speak on this item, to please use the raise hand feature. And we will begin in Santa Maria with Ken Huff.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Ken Huff, Chair Hartman and Commissioners. I'm Executive Director for SBCAN, Santa Barbara County Action Network. For 21 years, we've been promoting preservation of our county's environmental and ag resources. We were pleased with the conclusion of that last ad hoc committee. No changes were needed, and I question whether we need to do that all over again. Or that's what I wrote down, what I wanted to say, but listening to the whole conversation, I like the idea. I always thought it ought to be, how are you going to pick 3 commissioners, everybody's really in its core, as you've said. And so I support the idea of having workshops with the whole commission and allowing more than just the typical 3 minutes, however you decide to structure that. I didn't know that things had changed so much that that it's time to redo such a committee. But one thing that has changed that's been mentioned is that Santa Maria's Planning Commission is considering a staff and consultant recommendation for a general plan land use alternative that proposes annexation of 1,000 acres, all outside the sphere and nearly all of it classified as prime. And they're making that recommendation in spite of the findings by the consultant that the forecasted housing demand could be met by an infill alternative, which is what we're supporting, that wouldn't require any annexations. So again, I do support the direction you're going. Thank you.
Thank you. We will now go to Claire Weinman, to be followed by Lori Tamura on Zoom.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Claire Wyman with the Grower Shipper Association of Santa Barbara and San Luis Obispo counties. As you know, this is a very important topic, and we really appreciate this conversation and engagement and consideration of the issues. We remain interested in participating in whatever format makes sense. You know, I always learn a lot. It's a big topic with lots of different components, and so I know every time I talk with Ken, talk with Lori, I always learn a lot. So I would certainly appreciate hearing from others and continuing to learn and grow in that capacity. And also, as mentioned, that there's so many different needs and issues throughout the county, and trying to balance that with also making countywide policies. It is a quite the challenge. So, for those reasons, support the flexible workshop format so that you can have that quality engagement. Also recognize the value of a subcommittee doing a lot of heavy lifting too, and kind of breaking that out sometimes. Also, and then also is discussed how interdisciplinary and interrelated a lot of these issues are between the different needs and interplay of opportunities and needs and constraints and what that looks like now and in the future. So just really appreciate the engagement, and we would be happy to participate in whatever way makes sense.
Thank you. And we will now go to Lori Tamura, who is our final speaker.
Good afternoon. My name is Lori Tamura, land use consultant in North County, and I have been involved in LAFCO annexations for over 35 years with the original sphere boundary and annexations that the city of Santa Maria conducted back in 1993, and was involved with the efforts through 2018 with the recognition that the policies and guidelines that LAFCO and what state law provides, pretty much it was determined that those policies and directions were adequate, as Commissioner Stark mentioned. And but I understand that, as Claire mentioned, the education is good, and looking at how the next round of annexations for all of these urban communities are going to be considered with the directive from the state to consider housing. And not only with housing, you bring schools and parks and commercial centers, and you can't put it all in one spot. So I think the conversation that I was concerned about was that the committee initially in the staff report indicated that the only part of the conversation was going to be on agriculture and urban boundaries. But then the next paragraph referred to any other topic could be set up by another committee. I think this conversation should span the spectrum of issues that your organization needs to address when considering how cities and urban areas are going to be growing over the next 30 years, particularly with all of the direction that's coming down from SB CAG to the state RENA numbers. There's got to be a little bit of give here with the agricultural community, as well as the different political influences that come into these decisions. So I was going to volunteer to be on the committee too. And but if you go with the workshop format, we'll definitely be participating in that also. So thank you very much.
That was our final speaker.
Okay, well, I think we're ready for a motion. As I have it, we would ask Mr. Prater to return at our next meeting with a recommendation for the entire commission to sponsor a workshop open to the public that examines issues associated with SOI and annexation, SOI expansion and annexation. That is broader than simply a buffer policy and ag-urban interface. Is that?
Could I ask a clarifying question? Does that exclude the possibility that at the workshop the commission would decide either to create an ad hoc committee or to schedule a series of further special meetings?
I think Mr. Prater can come back with a set of recommendations, but the general sense is I think that we want a workshop that we all participate. We may follow up with ad hoc or with more.
My preference would be to leave it open and give Mr. Prater as much latitude as he thinks he needs to identify whatever alternatives are.
Mr. Geyer.
I question whether we really need a motion. The chair could just direct staff to come back. And
Mr. Prater?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I tend to agree with Commissioner Geyer. I think we heard your direction.
All right.
A workshop format that's going to be open to the public. Obviously, it's probably going to take some effort to facilitate that and get that set up and find a suitable time and location. So staff will be working towards that. But I don't necessarily think we need an agendized item to do that. I think I've gotten direction. We will start to work towards the efforts of that workshop with all of its scope in that sort of format. And we'll return with periodic status updates at various upcoming agendized meetings to let you know how we're progressing, where we're targeting, what time dates we're targeting of that nature, if that makes sense.
All right.
Madam Chair, may I make a request through the chair to our EO that you notify the groups that you had previously notified about the ad hoc committee, that we're going to hold that workshop and invite them to attend the meeting so that they are informed as to what we're about.
All right. I think we're ready to go to business item number 2. Madam Clerk.
Chair Hartman and members of the commission, business item number 2 is in regards to LAFCO annual audits, and it is to consider the following. A, to review 2 proposals for preparation of a LAFCO fiscal audit and consider executive officer's recommendation to approve Davis Farr's proposal to prepare the financial audit for fiscal year ending June 30th, 2023, with LAFCO options for financial audits for fiscal years ending June 30th, 2024 and 2025 in amounts not to exceed $12,500, $12,900, and $13,300, and a final contract to be considered by the Commission at a future date. And B, to determine whether the Commission should authorize the executive officer to request Santa Barbara LAFCO's inclusion in the joint multi-LAFCO audit group.
Mr. Prater?
Thank you.
Mr. Prater.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, so the Commission did direct an RFP go out. So one was sent out. We solicited over 50 firms to submit proposals, and we received 2 proposals, one from Davis Farr and one from Bartlett, Pringle, and Wolf. Those proposals were attached to your packet for review. You're welcome to solicit or select either of those 2. The recommendation is that we select Davis Farr, given that they made a proposal for 3 years worth of proposals, and they were the least amount in the contract amount. So both firms are highly qualified. Our current independent auditor is Bartlett, Pringle, and Wolf, and has been for well over 15 years. And we'd be happy to work with either to work towards our 23, 24, and 25 audits. Lastly, we are also noting that There is a multi-LAFCO effort, mostly from Southern California, with a northern LAFCO that now wants to be involved in a future RFP that they send out. They're coming due in 2026 for that RFP. And so we'd like direction as to whether or not you'd like for Santa Barbara LAFCO to join in as one of those multi-LAFCO agencies as we wrap up the potential contract with whoever you select under this.
So in other words, we would have a 3-year contract and give you direction to explore joining the larger Southern California LAFCO group.
When that time comes due, and we would then reach out to those LAFCOs that are spearheading that multi-jurisdictional RFP, adding our name into the ring of that. And then the outcome of that, if we do join, the commission can look at those proposals, decide if you wanted to join, or pivot and resolicit a new RFP.
Mr. Guyer, then Mr. Stark.
Is a BPW, is that a 3-year contract at that level price?
No, it's 1 year.
Yeah, and that would fit in a little bit better to take a look at the multi-LAFCO one after a year? If we signed a 3-year contract, we're pretty much stuck with that.
Yeah, the multi-jurisdictional isn't due until 2026. So.
2026. I think the dollar-wise per year, they're both pretty close to the same because one's 150 hours, the other one's predicated on 105. And I tend to favor BP&W because they have a long history with LAFCO.
Mr. Stark.
No, I had a question. Is there some, I think it's an accounting principle or an actuarial principle that indicates that we're supposed to shift auditors every so often, or is maintaining the traditional one considered to be beneficial?
We are, the intent is for us to shift, but the way in which we've done that with Bartlett Pringle Wolf is that they have a different individual within their firm come and audit our services. So we are shifting just within inside the same firm.
And my last question is, if we agree to either one of these contracts, are we committing to the Southern California deal, or we're just exploring?
Two separate actions are being requested. One is to commit to a contract to either firm under the terms that they proposed. The second is a direction to seek enrollment with the other firms.
But not necessarily
but not commit to that contract, correct.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Director Williams? Commissioner Williams? None here. Public comment?
No, I'm good.
Chair Hartman and members of the commission, we have no request to speak on this item.
All right, so we have to first decide which firm. I hate to disagree with Commissioner Guyer, but I tend to think it's if all things are equal and we get a better deal with one firm than another, that would be my inclination. Just because we've dealt with one historically, I think there is an argument that it would be good to have a fresh eye, but that's just my thought. I'd like other commissioners to weigh in. Commissioner Freeman.
Is it possible that working with a different firm than we've worked with before, it'll end up costing more staff time in order to be understand their phone system, even something as banal as that, is there any possible savings internally to working with the existing firm?
Good question.
Yeah, that is a good question. Obviously, Bartlett Pringle Wolf has worked with us numerous times over the years, so that they kind of know our system. We utilize the county's auditing services, so they know that system very well. That's not to say that the Davis FAR couldn't understand that as well. It's a pretty standardized list of criteria of material that needs to get submitted by staff. So I don't know if there's additional staffing time to that, but there is some sort of a comfort level with the material that Bartlett does have with this.
Commissioner Kiriakou?
I think I'm inclined for fresh eyes. I don't know how much of a premium I want to put on efficiency when it comes to an audit. You know, I think there's something to be said for familiarity, and there's something to be said for every once in a while, get a fresh set of eyes. Even if it's a little more inefficient, a little bit more staff time, we might catch some things we wouldn't otherwise catch, and there could be savings down the road of different types of currency that would be beneficial.
And Commissioner Guyer?
On the Davis FAR, that's based on 105 hours. Is there anything in the RFP that indicated what they would charge after that 105 hours? The other one's based on 150 hours.
I do believe they have an hourly rate in their RFP, in their proposal.
So if a decision was made on the lower costs, it's also lower hours. I mean, to me, I can't really work the math out in my head, but 105 hours at $12,500 seems to be really close to 150 hours at $15,000. But it would all hinge on how much is the hourly rate after that.
I will note that we do have Shannon Aiello from Davis FAR on Zoom. She may be able to answer that question. I will also look at the proposal, but she may have a quicker answer.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can. Go ahead.
Great. Hi, this is Shannon Ayala. I'm a partner with Davis FAR. I did raise my hand and want to confirm that the price that we have proposed is the price that we will charge the organization. It's not typical that we go over the hours that we have proposed. And as the administrator mentioned, the multi-LAFCO contract with Southern California, we actually are the current auditors for that contract, and I've based the hours typical of those audits, as well as reviewing the financial statements of your LAFCO. So I'm not expecting to spend significantly more than 105 hours. If there was a significant increase in hours, I would discuss any additional charges with the organization before any additional billings.
Any other questions?
No, that was beneficial to be able to hear that they have background in auditing LAFCOs. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any further discussion? Let's see. We asked for public comment and there was none. Are we ready for a motion?
Well, I'll move to authorize the executive officer to conclude a contract with the Davis FAR in the terms stated, and to pursue exploring joining the Southern California Audit Group at the appropriate time.
I would second that.
All right. We have a motion and a second. Madam Clerk, would you call the roll?
Commissioner Freeman?
Aye.
Commissioner Guyer?
Aye.
Commissioner Kiriakou?
Aye.
Commissioner Patino?
Aye.
Commissioner Stark?
Aye.
Commissioner Williams?
Aye.
Chair Hartman?
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously.
All right, Madam Clerk, business item number 3. Please read that into the record.
Chair Hartman and members of the Commission, business item number 3 is to consider recommendations regarding amendments to the Commissioner Handbook and provide direction to staff to return at a future meeting with changes and/or additions as needed to address the effect of the Regional Water Quality Board regulations and orders regarding the Carpinteria Valley and discharge of brine from certain agricultural operations, especially cannabis operations.
Mr. Prater.
We do have a PowerPoint to go over some of the suggested revisions of the policies. But I will start with reminding the Commission that after our May 4th meeting, we adopted the Municipal Service Review for water and wastewater for those 33 agencies. And one of the byproducts of that had to deal with Carpinteria Sanitary District. And the commission did give direction to return with some revisions to policies to address the issues that were raised in that hearing, particularly dealing with the cannabis and brine discharge issue. And so, as you are aware, we are required to have some sort of written policies, and so the policies that were put in place that dealing with urban utility services on ag parcels was adopted by a commission in 2009. With the direction from the May 4th, we also wanted to look at and needed to address our spheres of influence policies that deal with agricultural policies for the same sort of issue, in addition to the urban utility services on ag parcels. So there's sort of two sets of policies at heart here. And largely, we wanted to focus it and narrow it to the Carpinteria Valley issue. As we had their general manager speak to this commission during that adoption, part of that discussion was looking at a broader sphere of influence for the Carpinteria Sanitation District boundary that involved a number of agricultural parcels that had existing greenhouses on them, that had a desire to eventually annex and get sanitary sewer service. And so that was the direction that we set and to try to narrowly focus and get policy direction on. And so with that, we have in your attachment A here, some narrow policy revisions to specifically look at that issue. And this is the first revision under section A210 under the sphere of influence policies. We specifically add onto this discussion about giving consideration for sphere of influence designations in agricultural resources, specifically looking at whether or not the area resides within the Carpinteria Valley, for one, so we narrowly identify a location that the policy may have a narrow view on, where they contain some greenhouses, and that it can be demonstrated that the agricultural uses that are there can remain viable while still being able to address the Regional Water Quality Control Board orders that may come out. I will note that these revisions in a slightly different form was solicited by a number of interested working group members as well, the public, the ag community, the various city and county planning departments and ag commissioner's office, largely because I felt we had the ad hoc committee that was on our agenda. I had solicited their input about that topic and didn't want to oversight or overmiss the opportunity for their input on these narrow particular policies. So I went ahead and broadened the solicitation for input on these specific policies as well. And through that, we've amended this policy slightly to kind of make it a little bit more broader to address really any order from the Regional Water Quality Board that may come down that requires an agency that's providing a utility like water or sewer to be able to address that issue specifically. And initially I had it specifically to the brine discharge issue, which we've broadened that up slightly in this version so that we can address any order that may come from Regional Water Quality Control Board. Section 743 is a policy that's dealing with conservation of prime agricultural lands and open space areas. And again, a small notation here that it's largely discouraged unless that sphere being amended would comply with the previous section 2 above. And so this is, it also would have to comply with this, which means that it could reside within the Carpinteria Valley area. It would contain some greenhouses, that it would be still a viable agricultural use, and they're addressing the order from Regional Water Quality.
Mr. Prater, could you remind me of the order from the Regional Water Quality Control Board?
Essentially, the order was that they had to treat the brine discharge from the cannabis use.
They being?
The industry of the cannabis industry. So the applicants themselves have to deal with this brine that's being a byproduct of their operations. And as I understood it in that conversation on May 4th was they were largely having to basically truck that brine off-site, creating its own impacts to the environment. And so we wanted some way in which they could simply discharge that right into public sewer system. And so that's essentially what these policies are aimed at, trying to allow the Carpinteria Sanitation District to be able to expand their sphere, and one, either through an out-of-agency service agreement, or two, a full-on annexation reorganization, accept those parcels and get full service from them. So these are the specific policies that we were sort of faced with during that May 4th adoption of their sphere, and why we couldn't largely expand their sphere at that moment. We needed to address these urban utility service policies on ag lands. And so these are the, again, reiterating, it's in the Carpinteria Valley, addressing the Regional Water Quality Control Board orders, and still allowing agricultural viability within those parcels. So the intent here is that we would not lose inadvertently viable agricultural just by virtue of them having public service utility connection.
And Madam Chair, I wanted to add to that just that I've heard from non-cannabis greenhouse operations as well. They believe it's just a matter of time before they're subject to the same regs.
From the regional board?
Yeah.
Correct. And that's largely why we made a broader sentence structure there to contemplate whatever may be coming down from the regional board. So again, we did solicit public comment. We had 5 agencies submit comments. They're attached in your packet. Some of them suggested revisions to what we had proposed. Others requested more input or more information. And then we had the Grower Shippers Association also comment on suggesting the use of out-of-agency service agreements as a better mechanism. So what I would note to that is still a viable option. That is a policy already on the books to deal with out-of-agency service agreements. We would still need to amend the prior policies under urban utility services, because there's specifically where it's limiting that urban service of water or wastewater service, even for an out-of-agency service agreement. So if we felt like the out-of-agency service agreement was the viable option, we would need to at least amend the policies under Section 712, not necessarily those under the SOI policy, Section 2 or not. And again, the out-of-agency service agreement can be issued under any public health safety threat that's been defined. County policy also acknowledges the use of connections to urban services under a public health safety threat as well. So with that, it's recommended that the Commission discuss these amended policies as proposed, provide us some feedback, And if there's any particular changes, you can always direct us to come back and look at that. And we will note that the item was requested by the Agri-Commissional Office to bring it back to their advisory committee. And their next advisory committee would be in September 10th that we could make. And it's not, staff would support that as well, so that we get more input, more insight on as to what's going on with this issue and whether or not we're fully addressing it adequately.
So we may not make a final decision today. We may want to get more input.
May get more input and send it to the advisory committee, and we can re-agendize this item.
So I don't see any lights, so I'll jump in first with my question. I had a number of people calling me to understand, because we didn't have much of a clarification about the background and what led to this. But my understanding was that one issue has to do with adequate water going to Carpinteria so that they can have a potable reuse facility, and they would then clean the water and then provide good drinking water. So there's kind of a cycle there. Is that correct? Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, I would like to elaborate on it. Thank you, Madam Chair. So part of that May 4th discussion, as one of the rationales for the district wanting to have a larger sphere and ultimately contemplate annexation of that sphere, was to increase their flow and capacity so that they were embarking on a recycled reuse project, and greater flow would enhance that opportunity. And so that was part of the conversation that was being held, is they saw a benefit of expanding their service out into these areas, capturing that flow, thereby offsetting some of the dollar amounts that they were contemplating, and the capacity of the facility they were going to build, right? So if they wanted to know, is that going to be something that they need to plan for, or is that going to be off the table? And they could proceed, have a better sense of what they need.
And that's still a driving factor?
That's still a driving factor. In addition to that, the commission is, in the coming meetings in the coming months, will hear as a part of the follow-up. If you'll remember, there were sort of 5 different things that kind of came out of that service review of things that were on our radar. One had to deal with the Montecito community consolidating or not. Another had to deal with Summerlin sanitation and whether or not they were contemplating dissolution. Well, they have gotten into that consideration a bit more. They've entered into a feasibility study with the Carpinteria Sanitation District to contemplate what that might look like. So I anticipate bringing them back in September to give the commission a status update of where that might go. In which case, if they are going to target and the commission is going to foresee a future application of dissolution and annexation into Carpinteria Sanitation District, there would be additional flow and capacity that they would need to plan for. So that's all kind of, there's a lot of moving parts that's happening right now in and around that area.
So Carpinteria needs adequate flow to make this economic. They may get flow from Summerlin. If they do, would that make it economic, or what would happen to the greenhouses?
Yeah, that's all part of.
We don't understand that yet.
We don't understand the full details. I think that will hopefully come out of some of this feasibility study that they've embarked on, and we hope to give the commission some updates at least next month about where they're at with that feasibility. So I think a slight delayment on this action for these particular policies may help the commission understand the issue better.
So we can have some discussion, but maybe it's premature for a decision. For me, I'll just put this on the table. I want to craft this as narrowly as we possibly can, and I think you've got some factors there to apply. Is it Carpinteria? Is it greenhouses? Will agriculture remain viable? Do they have to do this to comply with water board orders? But for me, what's the driving factor, what makes this something I'm considering, is that it's the potable reuse, and that they'll treat it and then they'll give better drinking water back to the people who need it. And that's something we're not going to see everywhere. So for me, if I were trying to limit and list factors, that would be a really important one that would distinguish this case from many other cases that might arise. Mr. Freedom.
So I'd like to begin with a clarifying question in some sense on behalf of one of these public comments. I think I know the answer to this, but I just want to make certain that this gets explicitly addressed. This is a quote from one of the public letters. Both current LAFCO policies and CLUP Policy 210 already provide an exemption to extending sewer lines into rural areas where public health hazards are an issue and there is a demonstrated need to protect public health and safety. The ability to protect public health and safety is important, yada, yada, yada. Is it in fact not the case that current LAFCO policies allow us to do this?
That statement is correct. There is current policy does allow under those conditions.
I don't mean, I mean the current LAFCO policy, which potentially provides under those conditions that does not apply to this situation, in which case we do not need to make a modification, which is the implication, I believe, of this paragraph, is in fact not that is not the case.
Correct. That is
Okay.
not the case.
Right.
The scenario was that the Carpentry Sanitation District wanted to annex a broader property within ag parcels that are not under public health.
Great. I just want to make that explicit because this was one of the arguments that was made in one of these letters. So I am very sympathetic towards this kind of annexation. Part of this actually comes back to is one of the catalysts that had originally made me interested in being on LAFCO was looking at these situations where there is some kind of environmental improvement that can be made if only we were able to get past the idea of annexations and land use policy issues. Now, I say that because there is a lot of controversy over the land use policy issues. We end up, and as our current policy states, that the very, very emphatically that there will be a development that will eventually end up occurring if we start giving services there. And I can sort of see where that's coming from. I find the idea of holding hostage environmental improvements, in some cases even dealing with pending environmental disasters that we've looked at over the years at LAFCO, because we're concerned that bringing a sewer to an area will end up causing a ridiculously large amount of development in an area that we don't want to have happen. I'm really unhappy about that situation. I just want to make clear that I'm on the other side. I can see the issue, and I just start to wonder: is this just a problem with the way in which we're going about the problem? Whether there's something where we can, and at times we've looked at situations of because of Williamson Act issues, where some ability to look forward into the future some number of decades, that we believe something will end up occurring in a certain way. Maybe we could be looking at requesting that there be contracts that are done between the city and the county relating to future land use policy. We're not doing that, but maybe we can encourage them to have some contracts, and then we could take into account existing encumbrances that are contractual between other agencies with respect to our belief in the changes that might be occurring in development in that area over time in the future. Maybe what we just need is legislative relief, and we should be attempting to lobby the Assembly in order to figure out some way of making it so that we can get sewer to an area without being concerned that in the future there's going to be a bunch of development that ends up occurring there. But I want this to happen in some sense. I want to be able to see these great water projects end up occurring, but I also don't want the development to potentially end up occurring in the future. And maybe I even want to be looking forward 30, 40, 50 years and trying to prevent, in some cases, the loss of this agricultural land occurring because we gave the sewer. I can see those issues, and that's why it's just so painful for me. So I say all of that, and I'm also just going to stare at this wording. I really don't like saying, though, that we're just going to do it just for Carpinteria. Having a policy that specifically states a very specific, narrow little area like that squicks me a bit. And so I just am trying to figure out some way of generalizing that, but with generalizing that in a way that doesn't lead into all of the other issues, which is then why my earlier comments of, well, we're going to do this kind of, committee. Maybe we should try to figure out how to generalize the thought process of that committee to staring at the policy. We were looking at the agenda. We were agendized to look at a committee. And that's why I started saying, generalize that. And that's then potentially now this workshop that we're doing as part of the full board, trying to stare at these sorts of issues in a wider thought process of how we do annexations into agricultural areas for purposes of specific uses and things like that. It just feels like there's such a complicated problem, but I just really don't want, despite the fact that I really want to see this sort of thing happen, I don't want to write into the policy Carpinteria Valley specifically for this narrow, specific kind of project to have in the policy. So, yeah.
Mr. Geyer.
Well, I share Commissioner Freeman's frustrations and some of his point. And I kind of come back to what Gillette West Sanitary District is doing with Sandpiper. And it is on a case-by-case basis. I tend to favor that. Where we grappled with the same issue on an application from Sandpiper Golf Course to service. And what we wound up doing is proposing, which will come to LAFCO at some point, on a case-by-case basis, certain portions of it is on an out-of-area service agreement. And that, I think, really addresses what you're saying, is that I don't like the idea of just an exemption for a specific, because then somebody else is going to come along and say the same thing. Why can't I have it? On this particular, I think that preservation comes stronger from having it on a case-by-case basis.
Other comments? Commissioner Kiriako.
I'll just say that being explicit does not necessarily mean exclusionary. I think there is something to be said for looking at unique circumstances, unique challenges, and also unique opportunities, and dipping your toes into it, seeing what we learn, seeing if there's value added, and then if somebody else, I mean, to your point, if someone else comes in and says, I want to do it, well, then we can evaluate that. So I'm not yet persuaded that the inclusion of the Carpinteria language is unfair or inappropriate. I don't know if I've decided yet, but so far I'm not persuaded that it should not be included.
Commissioner Stark.
I have a suggestion and a question. I'll do the suggestion first. The suggestion is that we continue this matter with the direction to our executive officer to examine the range of language that could be employed to both capture the narrowness of the objection as well as removing the locality-specific objection. In other words, you have it as narrow as possible but not limited to a particular area. I don't know that Carpinteria Valley is really unique in this, except for possibly the existence of the pending enforcement order. So that would be my suggestion. We continue it to some future meeting when I guess as soon as possible, because I think there's some urgency on it. Here's my question: is when does CEQA get done on this? I understand that the claim that there's an exemption, but I'm not sure how strong the exemption claim is, and I'd like to have council shed some light on when would be appropriate to actually review a project under CEQA.
Mr. Prater and I have talked about this briefly. I did note in the record in the public comments received, 2 comments said that more CEQA review is needed for this to proceed. One was from the County Planning and Development Department, and the other one was from the,
Mr. Rohr.
I think the gentleman sitting out there, who's probably going to make the point again later. So CEQA is a sensitive issue, and I'm not sure a clean exemption applies to this, although I want to discuss that further with Mr. Prater because he's got some opinions on that as well. And
So that's another reason why we need to delay.
oh yes.
May I ask a follow-up to that question? Would it be appropriate if and when this comes back to have council advise us on how much time and effort it would take to actually do a CEQA review that would unquestionably comply with the thing? I mean, it's one thing to have to do a huge monster EIR, and it's quite something else to do something that's short and focused on the policy at hand.
Madam Chair, if I may, the way I viewed the CEQA analysis for this particular thing was we were looking at a specific set of policies that did not change, operated under existing land use. No land use changes were occurring, no new structures were occurring under this particular policy. And that when the time came to amend the Carpinteria Sanitary District's sphere of influence, which was a secondary action that would come out of once these policies are changed, that requires a specific CEQA analysis that we've yet to find a clean exemption for. So we're still working through that process on that when we actually amend the sphere of influence, which was sort of the second directory of the commission. First was to let's fix our policy, and then let's look at how we can amend to expand that district's sphere of influence. So that's the view that I had at looking at this CEQA analysis, was that the specific policy itself would qualify under the determination that we've made, but amending that sphere would not, and that would take much more further CEQA analysis.
So I just wanted to weigh in on the Carpinteria greenhouse question and note that there is a Carpinteria greenhouse overlay, and it already has special regulations that apply to it. And actually, in terms of cannabis, it has a quota, a cap for cannabis that can be grown within that area. So it's not like we're creating a new area. It has a designation. That said, if there were a more elegant way, for me, again, I think the driving thing is, as it is for Commissioner Freeman, this environmental benefit. If we're going to find that, I also find that an out-of-agency service agreement is more palatable than a sphere of influence expansion. So just putting this grist for the mill as you think about all of this coming back. Are there any more comments, questions before we go to public comment?
Madam Chair.
Yes, jump in.
This is Commissioner Williams, and you know, I've heard both some of you that would like it a little more narrow. It seems pretty narrow of a definition, and then some who want to get rid of the geographic part. I am okay with the geographic part. I'm actually okay with going either of those directions, but my cautionary note is to my colleagues is that the more broad this definition change applies, the more people will wonder about precedents in other communities and might be opposed. And I have here just a real problem that is not in the abstract. This is a perverse result of public policy that farmers are trucking water into other jurisdictions when the sanitary district needs that water for a project. And I would even say, you know, I appreciate the enthusiasm for recycled water, but this has significant environmental benefits, whether or not there was a recycled water project, because, it just doesn't make sense to force private businesses to truck water, polluting our roadways and destroying our pavement index, when there's a solution literally in many of these cases at the next parcel. So I just hope that we will continue, if we're going to do this, let's check in with the Ag Advisory, but let's move forward in either a more narrow or less narrow form, but let's move forward.
And I would just, before we go to public comment, ask that when it comes back, there be a background section that describes in more detail some of what's brought us to this point. Madam Clerk?
Chair Hartman and members of the commission, we have 2 requests to speak on this item, and we will begin with Paul Rohr.
Do I have to? Oh, It just goes on when I'm here. I'm happy to be here. My name's Paul Rohr. I live in Commissioner Chair Hartman's district, and we have a little vineyard in Los Olivos that we're very happy with. And I'm happy with what I'm hearing here today. And I just sort of want to dig into it. As you guys may know, I sent a letter out yesterday with some objections, and I really want to make clear none of those objections have anything to do with the, Carpinteria Valley sewer access. I certainly do not want to harsh the mellow of any of my co-agriculturalists. So and I think that there's some effort to get that done quickly, and I think that can be separated out and that can be done. That's not what I'm concerned about. I'm really concerned with one really narrow issue. The first sentence in section 712. And I don't feel like Mr. Prager really went into this, and I don't think that this is necessary. There's a change that's proposed there that would be really a dramatic change to your policy. And you do have policies, right? We kind of said, well, you don't have policies. And I think the chair is saying we want to dig in and really, have those policies more well set forth. But here's a current policy. Let me just read it. It says, it is the policy of the Commission to protect and preserve agriculture by avoiding the extension of potable water or wastewater services, sewers, to agriculturally zoned land, because this will, not might, because this will foster uses other than agriculture. Very clear statement. And I'm happy with that statement. The change to that statement, although it's 2 words, really turns that statement on its head. And you can say, oh, it's only 2 words. But if I walked in here and I said, I am the most handsome man in the room, it would have a different meaning than if I walked in here and said, I am not the most handsome man in the room. And I think it would make everyone happier if I used the not. So I'm going to do it. So here, even though it looks small, this is a dramatic change. And I know I have a limit, so I want to move to CEQA more out of a sense of helping than I've already put it here. The issue with CEQA, there isn't an exemption for this. That's not what staff said. What staff said is this is not a project. And that's absolutely wrong. There's 2 Supreme Court cases that are on all fours with this. It is a project because it's reasonably foreseeable that this will have a direct or indirect influence or effect on the environment. So that won't pass muster, and if anyone contested it, it would be problematic. I think that we'll have time to deal with that. One thing that I might ask, just in passing, is hearing what I'm hearing from Supervisor Hartman, I think it might be possible that we could revise. I don't think you need the language that you put in that one sentence, but to the extent you do, I could work with Mr. Dillon and Mr. Prager if they wanted to come up with language that would really address the current really fast issue that we have coming up, right? Because I don't want to get in the way of what needs to be done in Carpinteria Valley. But then these larger issues, I think, is what you guys are going to take on over the next year or 2 years. So maybe punt on the thing that turns into the larger issue and just work on the one thing that you got to get done now. And I'm sorry I went over time, and thank you for your consideration.
Do we have the timer on today?
Oh, it is here.
Oh, okay.
We will now go to Claire Weinman, who is our final speaker.
Hello, Claire Weinman with the Grower Shipper Association of Santa Barbara and San Luis Obispo counties. Appreciate all of the conversation hearing today. You guys are spot on with your comments and questions. One thing that we did submit written comments, and I'd like to highlight a couple of those, but just wanted to add a few things based on the conversation that we heard today and a little bit of historical context. As part of those background materials coming back, it might be helpful. I'm trying to refresh my memory. I know that there were some conversations about various definitions and sensitivities to whether cannabis is considered ag or not. I know there's maybe some different definitions. I know some of the commissioners might have that at the tip of their tongue, but that might be something to look into too, especially because of the disconnect between the state and federal status. So that might be that might be part of the nuance of these particular facts and circumstances. And also wanted to mention that there's definitely a broad range of state and regional water quality orders and waivers and policies. So, that's also something that is much broader in both the municipal and agricultural contexts as well. So just to highlight briefly, we definitely support the preservation of and protection of agricultural lands and share the concern that extensions of utility services, especially water and wastewater services, may induce urban growth into agricultural lands. But at the same time, we do share the concern with a piecemeal approach to countywide policies. And that an alternate approach, whether that's contractual encumbrances or whatever that right tool might be worth a look. But I also wanted to highlight that there are occasions where those extensions of drinking water and wastewater services to ag lands could be the most supportive thing of agriculture, and that consolidation of services could be the most beneficial route. So for those reasons, we welcome further discussion. Again, if a service agreement is the right tool, and what is in the most direct support of agriculture. And if that's a topic added to the workshop, look forward to that being a conversation as well. So thank you for your consideration of this issue.
And that was our final speaker.
So I guess we don't really need a motion because we're just going to give direction to work on this some more and get input from the Ag Advisory Committee.
I think maybe for the benefit of the public, a motion that clarifies what it is that we're doing might be in order, which I think we continue it to the next, maybe not the next meeting. Refer the matter to the Agricultural Advisory Committee to return to the Commission for policy with appropriate modifications in light of the Commission's discussion today.
All right, that sounds like a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Madam Clerk?
Commissioner Freeman,
Aye.
Commissioner Guyer,
Aye.
Commissioner Kiriakou,
Aye.
Commissioner Patino,
Aye.
Commissioner Stark,
Aye.
Commissioner Williams,
Aye.
Chair Hartman.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously.
Business item number 4.
Business item number 4 is to...
Madam Chair.
Yes?
I'm going to have to leave the meeting now.
Okay, thank you, Director Richardson.
Thank you.
Business item number 4 is to consider making nominations to the 2023-2024 Cal-LAFCO Board of Directors and to select voting delegates for the 2023 Cal-LAFCO elections.
Okay, on to something a little bit more lighthearted. The Cal-LAFCO Board of Directors will be electing new members, their terms at their annual conference this year. So if any new members of either the city or public member category of our commission wishes to be nominated, now would be the time to put their hat in the ring for that. So the commission wouldn't solicit any of the city or public members as to whether or not they would like to act on the Cal-LAFCO board. Our current public member, Commissioner Stark, is on the board. So he may wish to re-up, or he may say he's done his time and his commitment, and he will pass the torch on to somebody new.
Commissioner Stark?
I have done my time and committed no crime. I should say, I think there's an advantage to our LAFCO to having somebody on the Cal-LAFCO board. I should also say that with a minor exception is that I seriously loathe driving to Sacramento, which you have to do every once in a while. Being on the Cal-LAFCO board is nowhere near as irritating or time-consuming as I had thought it would be.
Can you take a plane?
It's very inconvenient. You can't do an up and back. You have to stay over another night. It lands in Sacramento at the wrong time for when they hold their meetings, and you got to do. In any event, I'm indifferent. If anybody really wanted to be on the Cal-LAFCO board, it's not a bad thing to do. But, you know, I'm happy to run for another term. I confess, I was shocked when I won. I thought I was doing Mike a favor by being nominated to make him look good for the LAFCO folk. And it was like the upset of the century that I got elected. There's another guy's like way more qualified.
Well, we got a winner. Does anybody else want to go against that?
I think he's a winner.
So I
Can I
think that's a
nominate him?
yeah. I think that's a nomination, a motion. I second, Madam Clerk.
Commissioner Freeman.
Oh, actually, do we have to take public comment on this before we?
Oh, good point.
Good.
Madam Clerk, any public comment?
Chair Hartman and members of the commission, we have no request to speak on this
Thank you.
item.
Glad to have that on the record.
Commissioner Freeman.
Aye.
Commissioner Geyer.
Aye.
Commissioner Kiriako.
Aye.
Commissioner Patino.
Aye.
Commissioner Stark.
Aye.
Commissioner Williams.
Aye, the county's not done with you yet, Mr. Stark.
Well,
Chair Hartman.
Enthusiastic aye.
Motion passes unanimously.
well,
Would you like to make a speech?
I thank you. I will continue my unremitting quest to simultaneously encourage best practices everywhere I can find them, and to put the laugh back in LAFCO.
All right.
So it's an uphill climb. I should.
Madam Clerk, business item number 5.
We are still on 4, Madam
Oh,
Chair.
I'm sorry. We have
That's
another
okay.
aspect
That's okay.
of it.
Yeah, the secondary component of that is the commission needs to delegate or nominate a delegate and an alternate to cast that vote at the annual conference on the board membership. So
would that be one and the same? I mean,
two different individuals. You don't necessarily have to be attending the conference in person this year. They do allow an email vote proxy. So
So I guess I'm not quite understanding this. For us to have Mr. Stark elected, we must have what?
well, okay, so the way the process works is we've now nominated from our commission. Other LAFCOs will be nominating out of the coastal region members to be on the LAFCO board, and there will be an election being held at the conference. Each LAFCO sends a delegate to cast that vote on who will be the board member for LAFCO. And so we need to send our delegate and our alternate delegate in the event that our delegate can't vote.
And they can do it remotely. Are you allowed? You'll be attending, I assume.
Yes.
Can you?
I can be either the regular or the alternate.
And Mr. Stark could also. He would be attending, right?
Yeah, probably if you're on the board of directors, you have to attend
Right.
the conference.
So then, would the motion be to have you both represent us?
There you go.
But we have to decide who's the regular and who's the
regular?
alternate.
Correct.
I would suggest it was far more appropriate to have our EO do the actual voting.
All right. So we have a motion that Mr. Prater would be our voting member and Mr. Stark would be our alternate. So do we need to call the roll. We need a motion. That was the motion. Need a second.
I will second.
Do we need public comment on this? Madam Clerk, is there any public comment on this motion?
Chair Hartman and members of the commission, we have no request to speak.
All right. We can call the roll on this.
Commissioner Freeman.
Aye.
Commissioner Geyer.
Aye.
Commissioner Kiriako.
Aye.
Commissioner Patino.
Aye.
Commissioner Stark.
Aye.
Commissioner Williams.
Aye.
Chair Hartman.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously.
All right, we're done with 4.
Yes.
On to number 5, LAFCO Achievement Award.
Chair Hartman and members of the commission, business item number 5 is to consider making nominations for the 2023 LAFCO Achievement Awards and provide direction to staff.
Mr. Prater.
Okay, so along with that conference, they hold an award ceremony. And so now would be the time to nominate any achievement awards if the commission desires to do so. That nomination period due date would be August 18th. And there's a number of categories in which you can nominate. It could be for an outstanding commissioner, professional, a lifetime achievement, a legislator of the year, or the Mike Gotch Award, which includes ag protection or innovation and collaboration in delivering municipal services as the categories. So staff has not prior prepared an award nomination like we typically would do in the past, but if the commission sees there's a fit for something or an individual to be nominated, we'd be happy to put a package together.
Can I ask what the deadline is?
The deadline is August 18th.
So we couldn't continue this to the next meeting, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Well, do we have any outstanding achievers that we would like to put forward?
I don't know, I should say that I'm on the awards committee. It actually involves the
So maybe we shouldn't nominate you.
Oh, no, you shouldn't. But I just wanted to say, to my knowledge, there haven't been any awards nominees flooding, and I imagine they'll come in fairly soon. I haven't seen anything. They usually reserve them for people that exercise courage under pressure. Is basically the thing that. Well, last time it was people that did sphere of influence things while their building was burning down and stuff like that. That's what tends to be rewarded, but we'll see.
I don't think we've done anything like that while we've had a fire. So
well, I think
maybe we'll pass this year's.
Our floor last year we turned in a really nice proposal with one phase of our municipal service reviews. Really good, innovative idea. The problem is it hadn't been completed yet.
Yeah.
So it's kind of hard to get an award for an intermediate phase of something.
And is that still the case, that we're working through the whole set? You can't give just water and wastewater?
Right. So we applied for our efforts that we completed on the fire and police service. We're now into the third phase, but we still got 2 more phases to go.
Yeah. Well,
And which I
clearly
think
the
would be
water
a
wastewater deserves an award on itself, but.
Yeah, I think when we get to the 5th one, I think it'd be a good nominee.
Okay.
And
We
we'll be
can
happy
take
to
a
put
shot
something.
with the wastewater, but I imagine you'd run into the same reaction as previously.
Okay, so I think we'll hold off this year and be ready for next year. Will we be done with all of them by next year? Depends how many workshops we have.
We still have 2 more.
Okay, business item number 6.
Business item number 6 is to consider the position on Assembly Bill 399 that proposes to amend the Uncodified County Water Act of 1943 in order to change the procedure for member agencies to detach from a county water authority.
Okay, Madam Chair, so this came to us kind of at the last minute of us preparing our packet. But essentially, AB 399 was introduced to deal with kind of a county water authority in San Diego County, in which they were wanting to detach a piece of that from that water district, in which that LAFCO is involved in an application and dealing with the process. And essentially, they're trying to do good through the process by which they're trying to find their best rates for citizens within San Diego County. It just happens to be that the piece of the legislation that ultimately got gutted and amended and kind of dumped on everybody at the last minute has a deal with a circumvention of the LAFCO process and the protest proceedings, in which generally the protesters are those that are within the boundary of the area that's being detached. In this case, they wanted to broaden that to include all of the water authority in this case. And so Cal LAFCO and San Diego LAFCO has put this on the radar to stir up solicitation from other LAFCOs that we band together to stick by the Cortese-Knox-Hertzberg Act and not allow numerous bills that we've seen over the years kind of do this to various LAFCOs, try to circumvent some of the rules. And so they're asking that we set an opposition to this bill and to seek solicitation to our local legislators to inform them of our opposition to that. And so this is placed on our agenda to allow this discussion to happen and to set direction if you so choose.
I guess that's accurate, and I think the staff report accurately reflects what was submitted to the Cal-LAFCO Board of Directors. The reason that they're asking us to do it is because Senator Lamone is on one of the critical committees that's moving this bill. So hence, it comes to us, and that's pretty much. It is what it is. It's an end run around LAFCO, and we can either weigh in or not.
Has Senator Lamone taken a position yet?
I think she moved the bill, and that's why they're concerned. So she was in favor of moving the bill that Cal, LAFCO, and San Diego. It's primarily San Diego LAFCO. You have to have a county-wide vote to detach a very small portion of the water authority under this. It's an old uncodified water authority law. But yeah, she voted to move the bill.
Yeah, I don't know. Water politics is complicated. I don't know about the issues, whether, the water issues might trump the LAFCO issues, so I would abstain. I'm not ready to take a position on this.
I should say I would support taking a duck on this. The people that they're going to listen to is going to be the San Diego folks. You would think it's pretty much of a localized issue.
Are there other people want to weigh in? Director Williams? Okay, do we need a motion? Okay, public comment?
Chair Hartman and members of the commission, we have no request to speak on this item.
And do we need a motion? Okay. All right. Information item number 1.
Chair Hartman and members of the commission, information item number 1 is to receive and file a report on the 2023 Cal-LAFCO Annual Conference in Monterey, October 18th through the 20th, 2023, and to provide direction to staff as necessary.
Mr. Prater?
Excuse me, I'm going to pass this to Natasha.
Chair Hartman and members of the commission, we have fast approaching our 2023 Cal-LAFCO conference. This year it will be held in Monterey, California. Again, the dates are going to be October 18th through the 20th, and registration for our annual conference is now open. It will close September 29th, 2023. We would like to ask any commissioners who are interested in attending to please inform Executive Officer Prater or myself. We do have some rooms that we have put on hold in advance, and would just need to know who would like to attend, and then we can go about registering you for the conference.
I'd just like to say I attended once, and it was really informative, and it was fun, and there were great panels, great speakers, kind of at a higher level. What are the issues with merging and bigger policy issues? I can't go this year, but I really think people who go would find it enjoyable and edifying. Commissioner Kiriakou.
If no one else is interested in going, I'm interested in going, and in particular, I'm interested because I'm really curious to learn more about the intersection between LAFCOs and housing laws and where that's going. So
That'll probably be somewhere on some discussion. May I ask a question?
Of course.
I noticed that the Cal-LAFCO people were talking about a shortage of rooms for Tuesday night. If I understand right, the meat of the commission starts early Wednesday morning, and then really gets going Wednesday around 1 o'clock. So you could either go up sometime Tuesday if there's a room available, or you could drive up Wednesday early morning and get there around lunchtime. I just want to know if we have Tuesday rooms as well as Wednesday rooms.
Commissioner Stark, we did make all reservations for rooms checking in on Tuesday.
Okay, thank you very much.
And LAFCO pays for commissioners to attend, right? Another inducement.
Correct. We pick up the hotel stay and the registration to the conference.
Any other takers? And the requirement is when you attend, you have to come back.
I'll have to check my calendar. Thank you.
You have to report back. Tell us the things you learned.
If my understanding is that Commissioner Kiriako is going, is that their mobile workshop involves their airport district. So if you got an interest in airports, which you may or may not, living in the flight path, that's what it's about.
It is a bike tour mobile workshop.
Oh, what fun. E-bikes?
They'll be dropping like flies along the way.
There is a bike tour prior to the mobile workshop. So
It might take
if
me
you're
a couple
interested
days
in
to
biking.
get there on my e-bike, but maybe I can stash it in the trunk.
Leave your bike away from the runway. There's no bike that
You
goes.
will
All
not
right.
have to bike to the airport.
So
They will shuttle you there.
Yes.
But if you're interested in the mobile workshop, just let us know and we'll pre-register you for that.
So Commissioners Patino and Kiriako may both have an interest, and obviously Commissioner Stark. And is there a drop dead date by when people have to tell you?
As Ms. Cabral noted, it was September 29th.
Okay, so there's still a little time. I can't remember if I asked for public comment. Is there any public comment on this informational item?
Chair Hartman and members of the commission, we have no request to speak on this item.
Okay, and going then to informational item number 2.
Information item number 2 is to receive and file a report on the Cal-LAFCO Legislative Committee meetings held on May 5th, 2023 and June 16th, 2023.
Okay, commissioners, so the Cal-LAFCO Ledge Committee did meet on May 5th and had discussions. Unfortunately, our June 16th, we did not have a quorum, and so there was some discussion, but no actions were taken for that particular meeting. And then we did reconvene here most recently, which will be another follow-up item to talk about this, in which AB 399 was discussed in July. But we are only agendized for May 5th and June 16th to discuss. So those packets have been included. We'd be happy to talk about any of those items or bring an item back if there's more interest in a particular bill.
Any requests, comments? Seeing none, any public comment?
Chair Hartman and members of the commission, we have no request to speak.
Any commissioner announcements? Seeing none, executive officer comments?
I have none.
We are adjourned to September 7th, 2023 here in Santa Maria.